This happened when I was in elementary school, but I'll never forget it. I grew up on the outskirts of Tokyo in the suburbs. It wasn't the nicest of places. It was in an apartment block, but I guess that was what we could afford at the time. The building was old and a little unsafe, but it was home. In fact, the first floor was a restaurant, a Chinese place, and it didn't have a good reputation. I heard the adults in and around my family speaking about that place from time to time. They never had anything nice to say about it. They said it was dirty, and to be honest, it looked dirty. That wasn't the problem though. The restaurant owner's son was the problem. We were about the same age. We were both elementary school student age. He didn't go to my school. I'm not even sure he did go to school, come to think of it. I never saw him wearing any school uniforms. He seemed to be wearing the same tattered t-shirt and bottoms I saw him in each day. I saw him pick on kids in the area as well, some kids who had learning challenges, and that really wasn't right. I saw him chasing a cat around with a stick trying to club it. I just had the lowest opinion of that kid and I really disliked him. I'll go further, I hated him. He made me feel really uncomfortable. And if you don't hate him by now, let me share something extra. One afternoon after school, I was playing with a couple of my friends near our building. There were 4 of us in total. Suddenly the restaurant kid wanders over with his stick. I don't realize that he's coming at the time. I knew he was there when I felt my skirt being lifted. I spun around in shock and my friends gasped. I came face to face with that restaurant kid and I shouted at him. I said something like, "What do you think you're doing?" And he looked me in the eyes, not ashamed that he had been caught doing something that he shouldn't have been doing. No, annoyance didn't come into it. He was irritated. He was angry that I had reacted in the way that I had, and he made this kind of tss noise. You know the one, right? It's like a tut, like that kind of thing. I didn't wait for him to say anything other than that. I just kicked my right foot back at him as hard as I could, and he fell onto the ground with a thud and groaned in pain. He looked up at me, and I expected him to lash out, but he grinned. Man, that grin was scary. I knew at that moment that I had to avoid that kid at all costs. When I was out playing with my friends, if I ever saw that restaurant kid, I would do my best to avoid him. We would end up hanging out in areas far away from my home, just on the off chance that we would run into him. But then he started showing up in other places. He always seemed to find my little group, and of course, whenever we saw him, we would flock like pigeons. We didn't want to be anywhere near him. Sometimes he would turn up without us knowing, and then he tried to mess with us, usually when we were in the park. Every kid wanted to be in the park during the summer, and even if he was there, I didn't want him to ruin the park for me and my friends. He kind of backed off after a while though, and seemed content to do his own thing away from us. So we didn't end up moving away from playing in the park. He didn't bother us and we didn't bother him. We were kind of grateful that he had something else to occupy his time with, rather than terrorizing us. We still loved playing on the slide. It wasn't just a slide. No, it was a really big slide that you could go through tunnels and you could get quite a bit of speed up. It was great, and also it was in the shape of a whale. So, as we arrived, we climbed the stairs to the slide and we noticed that there was 4 bottles of juice at the top. Underneath the bottles was a note on a slice of paper, and it read, "Free, please take," in bad handwriting. One of my friends started yelling and celebrating, saying stuff like, "Woo, we got something for free." I was more cautious. I told them they better be careful, because my parents always told me not to pick stuff up from the ground. And this kind of felt like one of those things, you know? So I didn't want any part of it. I didn't want that drink. My friend, I guess we're going to have to give her a name at this point. Alice will do. Alice said something like, "What are you worried about? This is for us." And she picked up a bottle of juice. 2 of my other friends joined her. and then all of a sudden I felt like a stick in the mud for not joining in. They each grabbed a bottle, and they called out saying, "Hey, you sure you don't want any?" and stuff like that. Alice then looked at me like she was annoyed that I wasn't going to join in as she unscrewed the cap of her bottle. She was the first to start drinking the juice. She really threw her head back and gulped it down. She lasted about 3 gulps before it happened. And then she just leans forward and starts spitting all the juice out. Well, more like throwing it up is more accurate. It was projectile vomiting, like from The Exorcist. Then she started coughing heavily, and we were all saying, "Hey, that's what you get for chugging it." You know, trying our best to laugh it off, but there was one problem. She didn't stop coughing. We all stared at her, collectively thinking, "Hey, that's a lot of coughing. When's this gonna end?" I then broke the silence. I asked her, "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. She just kept coughing and spluttering. It was no longer a laughing matter. She was spitting, and I watched her spit land on the ground, and it looked brownish. I looked at her, and this foamy brown spittle was trailing from the corners of her mouth. Something was very wrong. We all started screaming. Panic came at us thick and fast. We were all shouting for Alice's attention, each one of us wanting her to tell us that she was fine. Alice looked up at us, and she clutched her chest, and this was the last time we heard her speak, and she said, "Hot, hot, Mum," while she thrashed around. I'll never forget those words. An older woman who had seen us all crying and wailing came rushing over. She was asking us what we did, and the only thing we could tell her was that Alice drank the juice that we had found atop of the slide. As we panically explained this to the older woman, we saw a look of horror cross over her face. She dug her flip phone out of her purse and she called for an ambulance. Us young girls couldn't do anything other than freak out. Yet amidst all this frightening turmoil, I felt as if I should turn in the opposite direction of Alice, as if someone was looking my way, and I had to look back. It was like an itch that needed to be scratched. I turned to meet the eyes of the restaurant kid. He was crouching behind some plants in the park. It was summer and the grass was higher than usual. The restaurant kid was squatting down and watching our panic. He was smiling. He was so pleased with himself. My other 2 friends, and obviously Alice as well, didn't notice him, but I sure did. As soon as he noticed that I had spotted him, he ran for it. Moments later, an ambulance arrived for Alice. My parents and the paramedics asked me very serious questions that I couldn't quite answer. It was all a blur after that. I was so scared for my friend. I thought when she left in that ambulance that it might be the last time I ever saw her. Fortunately, it wasn't. She managed to make a recovery. She was even back in school after a week or 2. It was later discovered that the juice that she had drank hadn't been entirely juice. It was laced with pesticides. No one knew who had put those bottles on the slide. I heard phrases like random and no motive used a lot. In the end, they never caught the person who had left the pesticide juice mix on top of the slide. But I knew who did it. I just couldn't prove it. I was a kid and I didn't know what I could do about it. I was just really glad that Alice was back at school and she was safe. I guess you could say I was a little scared to put forward my theory for the culprit. I was scared if I told anyone he would try to hurt me or my friends again. We all got a lecture on how we shouldn't touch stuff that isn't ours or receive gifts from strangers at school after that. A few months after all this went down, the restaurant on the bottom floor of our building went out of business or moved on. I don't really know. It became a convenience store, and I think that no one missed that restaurant or that family, in all honesty. I have no idea where that kid went. I just know that he probably didn't stop there. He might be out there doing worse things than poisoning little girls at the park. I hate him. When I was a kid, my father hated me. I know he did. You can't convince me otherwise. Ever since I remember right up until I was in the middle grades of elementary school, I have no positive memories of my dad. It seemed like any time he opened his mouth to speak to me, sarcasm or abuse would come out. He would say the worst things. One of his favorites was, "There's no way scum like you could be my child." He told me that I had no right to make friends, and I was forbidden to have them. I didn't dare get caught going against his wishes. If I spilt food while eating, or even spoke, then I would get burned by an incense stick. Or worse. This isn't the story you think it's going to be, by the way. Stay with me. I never saw my father smile. We never went out on family trips, nor did we take photos together. And of course, he never bothered coming to any of my school events. I was scared of being around my dad. On weekends and national holidays, I would lock myself in my room and just stay out of his way, only leaving to bathe or eat. I don't have any memories of what happened during my life, during the 5th or 6th grade for some reason. It's not like there aren't any memories. It's more like I just don't have access to them for some reason. I just can't seem to remember anything about my family around that period. Next came junior high school, and that's where things really changed for me. I had a good relationship with my dad, and no memory or feelings of being frightened by him anymore. We go on holiday, we have a great time, we go on shopping days out, drives, you name it. I moved out when I was in my 20s, and I recently went back to my hometown. I needed to run a couple of errands, and I got to reminiscing about the past. I visited my mum while my dad was at work, and I was reminded of those horrible years I suffered at the hands of my father when I was little. I mentioned it to her, as it had been on my mind, and I hadn't ever had the courage to bring it up in my teens. It didn't feel nice opening up these old wounds, but I wanted to know why life was like that back then. Was my dad under a lot of stress? Was it something that I did? I just didn't know. My mother was angered by my line of questioning. She protested, and she said that my dad gave me nothing but love and resented the accusation. She said that I didn't know what I was talking about. This in turn made me extremely angry. How could she deny all that had happened? We ended up getting escalated, and a heated argument broke out. My mum then stormed out of the kitchen. We had been sat there having coffee. She returned and slammed down 2 photo albums on the kitchen table and glared at me. She ordered me to open them, and I was eager to do so, as I thought there would be no evidence of this so-called love throughout those dark years. But I was wrong. There were countless photos of my father and I, from when I was young right up until the point I had graduated from high school. Me as a baby in my father's arms, in my kindergarten clothes. My father was there with his arms around me, embracing me, hugging me, and smiling with pride and love. He was there at my sports day, cheering me on. He was even wearing a color-coordinated outfit with me. Another photo showed me atop of his shoulders, smiling, and in the middle of laughter, while he proudly held out a report card. I didn't recognize these photos. I didn't recognize any of those moments. What was all of this? I asked my mother, and she replied, "Your memories." Can someone misremember years of their life? Could I have remembered it all wrong? If I am remembering it all wrong, then what robbed me of those happy-looking memories with my father? Why do I remember him as evil? And if it wasn't him, who was that father? I kind of hate myself for ever thinking he was bad, but I'm in 2 minds. whether I can trust that he was good. I don't know what's going on, but it scared me to my core. Has anybody else experienced this? Hi, Jay here. I will now share some of the message board comments. Could you have confused your memories with memories from a previous life? Perhaps you were reincarnated in your previous life and you suffered in an abusive home. Since there is evidence in those photo albums and the fact that your mum disagreed with you so strongly, perhaps you have somehow repackaged a nightmare as a family memory. Since there were only memories from those school days, perhaps your spirit was in another place during that time, and you came back when you left school. I'm a father, and my daughter loved me so much when she was at school, but now she's older. It's like she doesn't want to know me at all. This, to me, just seems like the opposite of that. Your father could be, as you say, bad, but made sure he had enough evidence to show that he was a good dad. 2 photo albums isn't really all that much to go on. Your mother might not have been aware of his true nature, or she is maybe unwilling to accept that her family has been on the verge of falling apart for a long time. She only wants to see him as the ideal father figure. The way she threw those albums down on the table makes me feel that there's something more going on there. Jay here. There was a final anonymous comment which replied to the one I just read. And it read, I guess that this is the correct answer. Perhaps this comment was written by the original poster. When I was little, I did something that I think we all can say that we did from time to time. I spoke to myself. We've all done that, right? Even though I don't have a crystal clear memory of the conversations that I would have with myself, I can still remember doing it. Also, whenever I see some of my wider family, like my cousins or some family friends, they would sometimes remind me of how I used to speak to myself. I get why I did it. I mean, there were no kids my age in my neighborhood. I remember feeling so lonely, and I think that that lack of friendship that I had, along with no one being my age nearby, brought it all on. Because I didn't just talk to myself. I talked to myself while I stared in the mirror. And I wish I never did that, because if I didn't, then I wouldn't be here telling you my story. I haven't ever had the courage to tell my family or friends about this. I just don't know how they would ever believe me. Well, I guess some of them might, but I'm just a bit worried about allowing myself to become that vulnerable. So I'm writing it here. I mean, I don't know where else I can go to get this off my chest. If you were writing this and I was the one reading it, then I would be calling you crazy or a liar. I'm not looking for advice. I'm not looking for a sympathetic ear. No one can do anything about my situation anyways. Just read it to kill time, I guess. It's unsolvable. But anyway, here I go. My childhood memories are incredibly vague. I can't really give you a good enough idea of when this problem began. I'm pretty sure it was middle school though. Yeah, middle school was about the time I started to see someone in the mirror. You remember how I said that I often spoke to myself while I looked into the mirror, right? I saw the outline of a human, a perfect shadow, when I looked into the mirror. Day or night had no effect on the shadow figure I saw. It looked like neither day or night existed when I looked in the mirror. I saw that shadow first, but then not long after, I saw different things. There was a face that was just over my shoulder that grinned at me if I looked in my mirror in the bedroom. I had a vanity chest. When I was about that age, it used to be my grandmother's. If it wasn't the grinning face that I saw, It would sometimes be someone walking around behind me. They would turn their heads and look at the mirror as they passed, but I never recognized who they were. They were very shadowy. Naturally, if you're looking into a reflective thing like a mirror or a window, you would become very aware of your surroundings, as you can kind of sense presences, kind of like people passing by in front of shop windows when you're inside the shop. You're just aware of their presence, right? Over time, I guess I became more and more aware of these people and shadows that were reflected in my mirror. It got to a stage where I couldn't relax in my bedroom anymore. I could barely sleep either. They were just always there, with me. I felt their eyes looking my way. I sensed their presences, and I felt as if they wanted to get my attention. Like they were shocked that I was aware of them. I don't think I had much deep sleep during that period. I wasn't calm either. I was quick to be irritable. Not knowing if it was my imagination or not, I decided to move my grandma's mirror out of my bedroom, just in case. About a month went by and I was completely problem-free. By the time another month rolled on, I guess I wasn't thinking about it anymore. I was glad it was over. Fast forward about 10 years. I was moving into a place of my own for the first time. That will bring you up to modern timings because the following happened about a week ago. I was out driving in the middle of the night. I just love to be out on the road at night, especially when it's quiet. I love the sound of rain beating down on my roof and hood as much as I love the sound of summer insects chirping in the dark. So last week I was driving, and I look in my rear view mirror quickly. I then suddenly slam on the brakes because I saw a face reflected, even though I was out driving alone. The car screeched to a halt, and I lift my arm over the headrest and crane my neck backwards to check the back seats, but there was nobody there. I looked back in the rear view mirror, and I saw a shadowy figure. That shadow figure just glared at me in the mirror. I was so terrified by what I saw, I pushed the mirror away from me, and I sprung out of my seat and I left my car. I then realized that when I was a kid, it was never about what was reflected by the mirror, but what was in the mirror that was looking at me. It makes no sense at all, I guess. I just left my car there by the side of the road. Luckily, I managed to pull off to the side. I couldn't face getting back in my car. It was like those things that wouldn't let me sleep as a child were back. Have you guys ever seen the scene from Ringu where Sadako crawls through the TV? It feels like that's going to happen to me, and it feels like it could happen any time soon. I know what you think. I know what you think. I can be perfectly honest with you. I don't think I'm 100% sane right now. This happened when I was a child, and when I recount this, I'm relying on memories that are over 20 years old at the time of writing this. Some memories are a little vague, and sometimes I don't know if I'm able to distinguish what was real and what wasn't. I felt like I had to share this since it's something I think about more often than I'd like to admit. When I was in kindergarten, there was a girl I used to play with who lived in my neighborhood. My parents never met her, even though we lived in the same area. Whenever I tried to invite her over to play at our house, she always said that she couldn't make it. She had different reasons each time, different excuses. I just thought it was one of those things, but it was kind of strange. Another thing that she did was suddenly say, "I'm going home now," while we were in the middle of playing. Usually when a child that age says that, you would expect one of their parents to turn up and pick them up, but she just left. just by herself. I just thought, wow, she's a tough kid, or her parents must really trust her. I went to her house to play sometimes. It was really small, and it was primarily made out of wood. I don't think there's a nice way to put this, but I could tell, even at that young age, that her family were not well off. I never met her parents, but I guess that they were out working or something whenever I went to their house. It was always empty. It's so hard thinking back on this because I want to say more, but I know that I cannot really rely on my memories as a child. You don't really question your actions at that age, I guess. You just kind of run around, having fun, going with the flow, not really paying attention to every minor detail that happens. So none of what I mentioned before this gave me any cause for concern. There were no red flags. Towards the end of summer, we were playing together as usual, and my friend turned to me and she suddenly said, "It's going to be sad, but I can't play with you anymore." I was heartbroken. I asked her if she was moving away, and she wouldn't give me a straight answer to that. It was like she was deliberately avoiding answering that question. I think I kept pushing and pushing her to tell me what was going on, but she wouldn't. And then she abruptly said, "I'm going home now." And then she ran off before I could stop her. I was left there alone in the park, and while I was thinking that I had really upset her and ruined our friendship, or maybe the last time that I would ever see her, my mum came to pick me up and take me home. I wanted to make amends with my friend, so I went straight over to her place the following morning. I think it was a Sunday. I thought that she was still going to be mad at me when I got there, but I wasn't ready for what I saw. When I got to her house, I saw that it was in ruins. The front door and windows were smashed and weather-worn. Their front garden was overgrown with weeds. I couldn't believe my eyes. I went close to the door to take a closer look. I peeked in through one of the damaged windows, and I saw that there was a thick layer of dust over the floor. It looked like no one had lived there for years. This can't be happening, I remember thinking. It was her house, and I had been playing inside that house only a day ago. How could it have ended up in this state? I wandered around the building in a bit of a daze, just trying to figure out what was going on and trying to see different parts of the house as I walked. I looked in the backyard and it was overgrown too. The clothesline was frayed and the metal poles that kept it up were all rusted. I went back around to the front of the house and right up to the front door. I muttered an "excuse me" as I entered the house through the broken door. I had no fear going into the house. I had done it multiple times, but it was all different this time. It was a small house. There were only two main rooms, a kitchen and a big open living room. There was a small bathroom and a toilet room too. Even though it was dilapidated and the wood was rotting in the walls, it was exactly as I remembered it. Most of the furniture was gone, but the structure of the building was the same. They had these big pillars in their home. I guess that they were necessary, but they were in the middle of the room, and they weren't great to look at. I looked at one of the pillars and I noticed that there were some pen marks on it. I saw my friend's name written there and some lines. I think this was where she had been measuring her height. The handwriting didn't look adult. It confirmed to me one thing that I still can't get my head around. My friend had lived there. As much as it seemed impossible that her house was now in ruins, those height lines told me that she at least existed. Upon realizing this, I suddenly burst out in tears for a reason unknown to me. I felt so sad. It seemed like it was certain that I would never see my friend again. Now, if you think about it, it's weird, right? It's very, very unusual. I don't understand it, and I don't think I ever will. I was just very sad that I wouldn't be able to see my friend again. I just stood there in that decaying house crying. When I got home, I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents about what had happened that day. I thought I wouldn't be able to get through it without crying again. I ended up telling my mum a few days later. All I told her, though, was that my friend had moved away. My mum replied something simple like, "Oh, that's sad." It was like she never acknowledged that we were friends at all. It's now several decades later, and I can only just remember what my friend's face looks like. One thing I won't forget is the times that we played together and how much we laughed. Also, I don't think I will ever forget the daydream-like way that we parted ways. I'm not very good at writing, sorry if this hasn't made much sense. I guess I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts that I have had over the years. Obviously, the first one is, was she ever real? I wasn't a popular kid, and I was often alone. Was she something that my mind invented to protect me from my loneliness? Was I so absorbed in my friendship with her that I was able to ignore that we were playing together in an abandoned house? I'm not too sure about that, but I guess it explains my mum's reaction to me telling her that my friend had moved away. She didn't seem to care, and she seemed almost positive about it all. The second theory I guess I have is that she might have been a spirit, some kind of manifestation that revealed itself to me. Perhaps as lonely as I was in life, I just don't know. Maybe I was drawn to that house for a reason that's beyond me. Or maybe I'm just misremembering things, and that is slightly worrying. False memories or something. I miss that friend of mine, even after all these years. Yeah, I guess you could say, yeah, and I guess I'll admit that I'm still lonely. I still feel lonely. Perhaps one day I'll see that friend of mine again. If we got reunited, that would be really nice.